All right. So, once again, this is our environmental justice for the spring 2022 semester podcast to introduce the Troy and RPI community to environmental justice initiatives and Indigenous histories around the Troy area and the capital region. I am one of your hosts, Christopher Jean Louis. I'm a sophomore sustainability studies and economics dual major, and I'm joined by my other co host, Nicole.
Hello, I'm a junior. I'm dual majoring in business analytics and science, technology, and society. My concentration is in law with an STS.
That's crazy. So, if you remember from our last episode, we discussed lightly some PCB contamination and local waters and grounds for Indigenous peoples. And so, for this episode, we would like to focus on that contamination process, different ways the Troy area is being polluted, and what we can do about it. So, to start off, Nicole, what can you tell me about environmental justice as a whole?
So, environmental justice itself, it's kind of hard to define, and it's also hard to put in one specific group that's at fault for it. Think of air, so local pollution can be educated, but air also travels. I guess it's kind of really difficult to define that, and also I guess just the law of environmental justice too.
Yeah, it was hard. I put you on the spot. Anyways, so environmental justice is really just sort of combating pollution, extractive industries, and other environmental exploitation that sort of combats or specifically exploits and marginalizes indigenous groups, black and brown people, and makes it harder for them to escape polluted areas, live freely, enjoy that economic mobility, and live happy lives. So environmental justice usually operates through the legal system to sort of stop these extractive industries like fossil fuels from either entering or polluting a lot of these areas that are either tied to tribal nations or black and brown people. The problem is, because the environment is quite literally everywhere, it's very hard to prosecute. So we mentioned air. If you think of how to prosecute air, you can look at polluting plants in Albany, for example. You would be able to see the black smoke falling and dripping ashes onto nearby homes. That's very easy to prosecute. But when you think of carbon emissions, like from a car, you could go back to the car company, but then you can't list very specific locations as damages because the air is already emitted into the atmosphere and it traveled across the United States. So it's very difficult to pin down who's injured by a lot of these things if it's not very explicit, like a very community organized thing. There's also the ambiguity and permissiveness of law. When you think of environmental justice law or environmental legal regulations, a lot of it either has loopholes for companies to escape through because America likes to pass laws that aren't exactly just, but they are conducive to business. And even these laws, when they're implemented, are very difficult to sort of prove in courts because no matter what the law says, you still have to prove every claim you make before the judge. So a couple examples of the types of law that appear in environmental justice cases include tort law. Tort law is a very basic punitive law that basically focuses on proving that one person or a party of people have been injured by an action. So if I were to commit petty theft, I believe that would be a tort law in an environmental context. If you were to go to the canal behind a neighbor's pond and dump asbestos, or I don't know how you would have it, but anthrax or something into the river, it would seep into the groundwater or the pipes that would flow into your neighbor's home, then that would be covered in tort law because you provided a nuisance or you've harmed them by yourself or through your actions. So tort law becomes more complicated when we talk about environmental justice because toxic torts, which basically talk about punitive actions towards contaminating or distributing waste from fossil fuel industries or contaminating substances, because you have to involve the harm to multiple people, groups of injured persons, and each one can file lawsuits at different stages of legal process. And with each lawsuit you file, you sort of have to redefine the context of what you're suing. So if we were to take, for example, an indigenous tribe, they can sue on behalf of their household, or they can sue on behalf of the tribe. And with each one, you have to grow the amount of information you have to bring to the court, prove that has been damaging, and prove that you deserve reparations for that specific action. Because of the scale of these lawsuits, it can get extremely long, extremely expensive, and it's only made worse by this systemic oppression and poverty that a lot of these black and brown neighborhoods and indigenous peoples experience. Just to retain a lawyer, it could be thousands of dollars, let alone pay the court fees. And should you lose, because a lot of the environmental justice law is permissive, a lot of communities have to front that cost, and that's proved to be a very effective deterrent for trying to regulate or escape a lot of these polluted areas or environmentally unjust places. So there's another category, but it's also just really just looking at environmental justice as a whole. These laws are designed to benefit the public at large, which is why financial penalties that are imposed on perpetrators who wantonly pollute usually go to the government or to the community, which means a lot of these communities that bring these lawsuits often don't receive the money that they want. So let's say a tribal nation has sued ExxonMobil for drilling on their land and they just did a massive oil spill. If they were to prove that they violated some terms of federal law or environmental regulation, a lot of the times the fines would go to the government as a fine or a measure to sort of like pay the government for breaking their law. But a lot of the reparations would in turn go to the community to clean up that oil spill or sort of recover from the health effects of having that oil spill. And so that's made things extremely difficult for people to sort of reconcile or even pursue environmental justice because it almost seems pointless because you're handing a check to the government from industry rather than helping your community. Of course, there's general things that because there are racial, sexual, gender-based lines within environmental justice. So the Civil Rights Act of 1964 often comes into play when we're talking about litigation. Title VI of the law helps protect against discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, or religion. So it's often used in these environmental suits to explain away or justify why they're bringing these issues to court because, of course, and it's been well documented, indigenous tribes and racial groups like marginalized Black Americans or Caribbean Americans are curiously closer systematically to pollution sites, waste disposal sites, incineration sites, all of these things that can spread contaminants and pollutants and carcinogens very far, very fast. So that's more of the consumer side and private class action suits that a lot of people will pursue to environmental justice. But there's also a state and federal government side where we have the Environmental Protection Agency and state organizations like our very own New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, or the DEC, that sort of litigate on our behalf whenever they find one of the more egregious examples of environmental injustice to sort of stop private industries from ruining lives, per se. Now, one of the more infamous examples of environmental injustice that involved a lot of the law and contaminants that we're talking about today was Flint, Michigan. So the initial crisis in Flint, Michigan was caused when, to save costs, the city government switched from Lake Huron to the Detroit River and the Flint River for their water sourcing to flow through community households and sort of feed their pipes and feed the children. The problem was the Flint River was extremely contaminated with corrosive agents that would wither away at the pipes and leach lead into their water to the point where the water was coming out brown, red, rust-colored orange, and so obviously contaminated that a lot of the residents just refused to drink it. Problem, again, was once this shift was made, of course you can't expect the community to start regulating something that the government did, so that once community started uprising and telling the government to fix the mistake, there's a failure to properly evaluate the consequences of the switch and to implement corrosion control. A lot of this is done usually by leaching chemicals into the water to sort of fix retroactively the pipes, but not even that was on the table because the city, the government, and the state all refused responsibility or pretended that this crisis wasn't happening. There was a lack of local government throughout this time, with an emergency governor making decisions for what was mostly an African American city, which of course brought a racial aspect and an obvious lens of discrimination into the conflict. But again, that's just an example of how environmental justice deals with contaminants through law. And there's a lot of applications we can have in Troy that I'm sure Nicole can talk about.
Yeah, I mean, Flint, Michigan, I think is the most famous example because, anything regarding environmental issues or anything like that, like Flint, Michigan, that was, one of, the worst cases. But there is a local thing that is happening in Troy. Do you know the name, Chris? Do you happen to know what I'm talking about?
I think it's called Norlite, but I'm not sure how it's spelled. I do know it's very close to campus, though.
Yeah, it's actually in Coho, so it's I think a 15-minute drive-ish from RPI. And you're right, it is called Norlite facility, and it's actually been in Coho since 1956, and it's basically a manufactured lightweight porous ceramic material that's produced by expanding and vitrifying select shale in a rotary kiln, and the end product is then used in constructions, a bunch of construction businesses utilize Norlite. It's currently permitted to burn hazardous waste and then different types of waste fuels, They use fuel oils and natural gas in the kilns. They're used to burn, it's called AFFF. It's a type of firefighting foam. It's called aqueous film forming foam, which contains and how do I say the word?
Polyfluoroalkyl.
Yeah, that substances, which stands for PFAS. Sorry, we're like throwing big words at you guys, but
that's all right. I've heard of PFAS. Yeah.
And Norlite's no longer burning the PFAS chemicals. They don't naturally break down easily, and they persist for like a long time in the environment, and especially in the water. There was a dust study done with Norlite last spring, so like spring of 2021. And the results of the study showed that dust particles were like larger than the PM2.5 from the Norlite facility that's migrating to the Saratoga site's property. So yeah, Norlite's it's a huge issue where like it's not great for the environment because of what they're emitting into the air. So that's just one example at Troy. And then another example that's not in the Troy area, but is in the capital region. It's called Sheridan Hollow. It was essentially like a plan to like place a 16 MW fracked gas power plant in that neighborhood, Sheridan Hollow, which is in Albany. It would essentially be used to heat and power the Capitol, the Empire State Plaza, and other government buildings in Albany. And I guess like sort of the history of it is that in 1911, the Sheridan Avenue Stream Plant, it burned coal on Sheridan Avenue to make steam to heat the Capitol and the other government buildings. The plant was used to continue to heat and cool these buildings, and they're now burning fracked gas. And there was a garbage disposal incinerator that was actually built next to the SASP in 1981. And this incinerator basically sent pollution and toxins into the air. And so due to that, the plant was closed in 1994. As of right now, there's currently a generator that is tested on a regular basis that basically sends plumes of bluish black smoke into a row of houses down the block. And, due to that, I mean, I don't think anyone likes when like things are going into the environment, because due to that, a lot of neighbors complained about having headaches and burning eyes and really bad noise when the generators were being tested. So that was really a huge negative impact to the Albany community. And I'm sure like Chris can talk about like the solutions efforts that people are making in like the States too.
Yeah, it's just so wild that for Sheridan Hollow, I guess, that the government buildings and like the state capitol can be sitting less than 10 minutes away by car. And they're drawing power for something that's just dumping ash and pollutants on their people. It just seems so bizarre that they would ignore these, like the circumstances that they created. But of course, there's never no solution to a lot of these problems. If you impose a problem, then you can always impose a solution. So for Norlite specifically, there's a great place on Prospect Park or above like the impact hill where you can see the plant from campus. But a lot of the time it's active. You can see the plumes of smoke rising, even though it's still illegal for it to operate because it's run out of its permits. But because it's been operating illegally, the Department of Environmental Conservation and the New York state government, they've issued a notice of violation that requires the facility to immediately, quote unquote, cease and desist actions resulting in dust leaving the property, which includes all the burning and incinerating that they've been doing, in addition to other facility operation improvements and enhancements so that they can focus on addressing these serious and preventable violations to both state law, permitting, and a lot of environmental regulations, since they're essentially burning things that has been permitted, but doing it in an unsafe way, insofar as to dump contaminants, carcinogens, asthma-inducing chemicals onto rooftops, gutters. A lot of residents have shown videos of them having to wipe off ash and dust from their cars before they have to drive to work. It's so ubiquitous. But Sheridan Hollow is also a very curious case because of their proximity to the state government. And because New York State has been so forthright in sort of participating in the energy transition, it's only been more stark and odd to a lot of residents in New York that they would permit things like the Sheridan Hollow generators to continue polluting and contaminating and operating in the space. So a lot of the residents of that neighborhood created the Sheridan Hollow Alliance for Renewable Energy, or short for SHARE. And they're essentially counter-proposing a solution to sort of replace this fossil fuel plant that has burned fracked gas with large turbines to generate electricity and heat for the plaza of the state capitol, to everyone else's detriment by offering instead like a report proposing different plans for different government buildings to sort of transition from these fossil fuel power sources to renewable energy sources in a timely manner that doesn't jeopardize their business or their operations, but that continues to keep the state's goal of transitioning to the renewable energy system consistent across all the neighborhoods, and sort of like save the neighborhood from the rest of the pollution that's been damaging so much of the environment.
Yeah, I mean, like, and kind of going off what Chris was saying, it's just insane because I think another thing to note is that areas such as like Sheridan Hollow, and I'm pretty sure where Norlite is too, like a lot of these areas are like known to be like not the best areas, where there's like more like low income people living there, and it's just like insane because like those are the most areas that are harmed the most by environmental issues. And that's why I think it's very important for like people to actually go and help out. And so kind of like getting into like how RPI students can actually help these communities. And I know that's very difficult because especially like at RPI, like we're always overbooked with classes and like extracurriculars and things like that. But I think one great step that people can take to actually helping is actually like getting to know like Troy, or like not just maybe like the Troy area, like the capital region in general. Like do your research on these local environmental groups, because they do like amazing things in like trying to like get your voice out there with like trying to help these issues, and also just maybe like going physically out to Troy if anything, or like physically out to the capital region to like see what these areas are like. Like I know some people who think like Troy's like not a great area, and like I mean I personally think it's getting hella gentrified, which I guess that could equate to it's getting to a better area, but like not in like great circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's like one great step. Also in terms of Norlite, I mean, I know recently the DEC actually ordered Norlite to immediately seize and desist like offsite dust impacts, because again, like how I was talking about, it is negatively affecting that area in general. But I think another great way to help is just like reaching out to like local like government officials, or like again reaching out to like local environmental groups. And then it's also the same thing with Sheridan Hollow, learning more about Sheridan Hollow, reaching out to like local officials, and also looking into the resources from SHARE, which was like the Sheridan Hollow Alliance for Renewable Energy, because these are like great resources to learning more about it, and also like being able to help, because I think RPI students should just learn about it and be aware of the situation.
Yeah, there's always reason to be connected to where you're living. A lot of us sort of just transition through Troy and then leave. For the 4 years we're here, a lot of us take advantage of the city for its outings, its bars, different places we can go to in the capital region for fun. But besides driving the economy, there's not much we really contribute to the area that we could. I would label that mostly to RPI trying to stay like apolitical, I guess. But essentially, if these are like net harms to the community, then there's really no more reason for us to try to stay out of it. And so when we sort of advocate for RBI students to sort of get out and talk to local officials and sort of engage in these causes, both to familiarize themselves with these problems and to sort of advocate for change on behalf of our community, because the Troy area is part of our community. It's not just RBI. There's been a lot of pushback, partly because students like to not get involved in politics or confine themselves to campus or focus on their studies above everything else. But these things aren't mutually exclusive. You could always involve yourself in politics and in policy and use that to inform how you approach engineering as a discipline, or how you look at emissions for any sort of industry you enter, or how you confront leadership if there's a problem. So it's definitely a reason to go out, learn more, and keep going. But I do want to say, when we tell you to reach out to local officials, I can already anticipate a lot of people saying, I have local officials back home. If anyone I would talk to them, I have no reason to talk to people in New York. I almost agreed at some point because I'm from Florida. I was like, why I have people submitting like very unreasonable laws back home. Why wouldn't I focus on that instead of focusing on here? And so I think it's important to counter that idea by sort of bringing up the idea of dual constituency. Because we're living here unofficially for 4 years, we are implicated in the condition of the environment or how politics operate in this state, because a lot of student loan forgiveness or student-run programs or university funding or even environmental issues like around the Troy area can affect us, especially if we were to live off campus and really integrate ourselves into the community. And so a lot of government officials, like our House representatives or our senators, will count us among their constituents, even if we're not from New York, because we spend so much time here and because we live here for so long and involve ourselves so much in the community. So there's really no reason not to reach out to them and sort of take advantage of that connection to help improve the living conditions for people around us and within the RPI community. But yeah, that's it for this episode. We're hoping that this gave you a little insight into how contaminants sort of seep into the culture and environmental industry around the Troy area and the capital region. We talked about how you could help around the RPI campus and sort of engage in the capital region's politics. And look out for more resources as you try to explore how to be an environmental justice advocate as you stay here at RPI. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.
See you guys.